My name is Nina Means. I'm the director for Austin Community College Fashion Incubator, and we are here with ACCFI Presents. Today, my guest is Jeffrey Banks, American icon in the fashion industry, and I am just so happy to be able to welcome Jeffrey to our web show. We've been running this for a few weeks now. It's really been something really for the larger part of the summer, and really introducing industry veterans and industry icons to our local industry here. But it's really been reaching so much further beyond this area. So, Jeffrey, we are so glad to have you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I wish I could be there in reality, but I'm happy to be here virtually. I'm here in Austin, so I have yet to come, but I'm very much looking forward when travel opens up to come and visit Austin in person.
We would love to have you. We're really looking forward to it. We were able to meet through a mutual friend, Ed Jones, Edward Jones III,
Yes.
who has been an incredible support here for us creating the Fashion Incubator. But he was like, "You've got to talk to Jeffrey Banks. You just got to talk to Jeffrey." Tell me again, how did you and Ed meet again?
Ed and I met because, well, first of all, we're both in the same industry. I mean, originally I started in the menswear industry, although I've done women's and I've done kids also. But Ed worked for Perry Ellis. He helped develop Perry Ellis's menswear division. Perry originally started as a women's wear designer, and a year or so into doing women's, he decided to branch out into men's. And Ed came to run the business. Came from Texas to New York to run the business. And that's how we met. Perry and I were great friends. We met exactly at the beginning of both of our careers. I went to Perry's very first show and every show after that. And was a great cheerleader of his talent and as he was of mine. And then, of course, we've always remained friends and seen each other. But a few years ago, when I did the book bio of Perry, Ed was really instrumental in connecting me with a few people that I'd lost touch with, and he had also had a lot of archival photographs and stuff, which we ended up using in the book, and so he was very helpful in that way.
Wow. Jeffrey, one of the things I really appreciate about you is that your work across this industry has really kind of spanned across all parts of the business. I mean, you're in publishing, you've been in education, you've been working as a designer yourself, doing incredible business, but you've worked with so many of the greats. Can you really tell me, how did you get your start in the fashion industry?
Sure. Well, as a child, I always loved to draw. My mother says I could draw before I could walk. I don't believe her, but that's what she says. And she said I never drew stick figures. They were always recognizable forms. That's a cat, that's a dog, that's a person, that's a house. And my father also drew really well too, but he became a cartographer. You know what cartography is? The art of map making. So he did that for the government in Washington, D.C., where I grew up.
Wow.
And my mother, I always say, was the original clothes horse. My mother has exquisite taste. She's 99. She'll be 100 in January. And
Amazing.
she still wears high heels and she still looks extraordinary. And so I always say she was, the original clothes horse. And I think early on, I realized from a pretty young age that to be an artist and to be successful and be able to make a living is really hard. But if you could take that artistry and turn it into clothing design, you had what I thought of as instant gratification. If you design something and someone likes it and they buy it, you're going to find out fairly quickly whether you're successful or you're not successful.
Right.
So by the time I was 10, I knew I wanted to be a fashion designer, and I designed my mother's Easter outfit.
Wow.
And even though I didn't know how to sew, I sketched it. I went with my mother to her dressmaker. And my mother sews beautifully, by the way, but she worked full time for the government. So she didn't have a lot of time to sew. But she had this wonderful dressmaker, Annie, who could make anything from a photograph, from a sketch. And, this bossy little 10-year-old, went to the fittings, picked out the fabrics, said, no, make the bust higher, make the skirt shorter. And, they listened to me, these two women who knew how to sew, listened to me tell them how to make this dress and matching coat. It was a banana wool jersey coat
Wow.
with princess lines, with asymmetric buttons, jet buttons,
Wow.
and then she had a banana raw silk dress underneath. I told my mother exactly what accessories to wear, what kind of hat, what kind of shoe, what kind of bag. And we walked into church on Easter Sunday, and she got rave reviews, and the die was cast. That was it. There was no
That's
turning back
amazing.
from that point. And there was a store in Washington, D.C. called Britches of Georgetown, which was the most exclusive, most expensive men's store in Washington, founded by two men who were advertising, had an advertising agency. And they bought all their clothes in New York because Washington was very staid, very conservative in the 60s. There wasn't a lot of fashion. So people used to say, where do you get your clothes? And they would say, oh, New York, New York. So they decided they should open a store. So they opened the store in Washington. I started shopping there from the time I could wear men's clothing, so about 13.
Mhm.
And much to my parents' dismay, because it was the most expensive store in Washington. And I was in there one day after school, one Thursday after school, when I was 15, and the assistant manager came over to me and he says, I think you might be the youngest customer who shops here. How old are you? Like 17, 18? I said, no, I'm 15. He said, 15? And I said, yes. And he proceeded to tell me what he thought was a secret, that they were going to open a second store the following year on Connecticut Avenue, close to the White House. And I said, yeah, I know where you're going to open that store. It's the old Saks Pasternak building, blah, blah, blah. And he said, how did you know that? I said, well, I read the industry newspaper, DNR. And he said, you read DNR? And I said, yeah, I've had a subscription since I was 12. So he said, would you like to come and work for us?
Absolutely.
And he literally said that. That was the next thing out of his mouth. And I said, I would love it. And that Saturday, I started working, selling clothes, never having had a job in my life. And I have
Jeffrey,
to tell you, Nina, it was the most fun I ever had. I
that's
mean, it was
amazing.
just such a joy to wait on people, to help these guys who couldn't put a shirt and tie together to save their life. And then the following week, have their girlfriends or their wives come and say, I don't know what you did, just do it again, because he said it was so good. So it was, I never looked at it as work, and people always say that if what you do is what you love, it's not work, and that's what it seemed like to me. And so anyway, the following year, the owners of the store told Ralph Lauren that you got to meet this kid, this 16-year-old kid. He knows all about you. He's a huge fan of what you do. Now, you have to remember, Ralph Lauren at that point had only been in business 3 or 4 years. I knew instinctively he was going to be as big as he is now. I knew it. I felt
Just
it.
in
And I
thought.
believed in him. I just
Wow.
totally believed in him and his vision of clothes. And Britches was one of the first 5 stores in the whole country to carry his clothing.
Wow.
So he was coming down to do a charity fashion show, Valentine's Day. And I had perfect attendance, elementary school, junior high school, high school. And I told my parents, I'm not going to school tomorrow. And you're going to write a note. And they did. And they did. And I went to the store, and I had just gotten my driver's license. And the owners of the store said, take the company station wagon and pick him up at the airport, which I did.
You picked up Ralph Lauren from the airport?
I picked him up at the airport, yes. and had a flat tire on the way. Had a flat tire on the
Oh
way.
my goodness.
Flagged someone down to help change it because I didn't know how to change a tire. Fortunately, we had a spare in the back. But
Yeah.
we changed the tire. I got there. Of course, I was like, sweating bullets because now I'm late to the airport. Fortunately, his plane was late coming in
Oh
from
my
New York.
goodness.
So that was okay. And we spent the entire weekend that he was in Washington talking about Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire and clothes and all the things that he loved and the things I loved.
Wow.
And he said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Basically, he said, "I want to be a designer like you." And he said, "Well, when you come to look at colleges, you call me up. I might have a job for you." Well, that's all I needed to hear. Okay, that kept me going for the next year and a half.
Yeah.
And just the thought that he might have a job for me. And so I came the next year at 17 to look at colleges with my mother. And the day after we looked at schools, I went to talk to Ralph. And 2 weeks later, he said, you've got the job. So 3 weeks out of high school, 2 months before I started college, I was working for Ralph Lauren as his second assistant, only the second assistant he'd had. So it was great. And we continue to have a great relationship. We're still great friends. He invited me to his 50th anniversary gala, fashion show, and dinner. Had me sit at the head of my table. I mean, it was lovely. It's lovely.
That's
He always
wonderful.
called me his other son, which is really, really great.
That's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us for ACCFI Presents. Definitely come back and join us next week for our next segment in this series. If you particularly enjoy the content that you're seeing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, keep up with our conversation on our social media handles at ACC Fashion Incubator on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you guys next time.